You really thought Dad trusted you more than me? Look around, he gave me everything, and you've got nothing. My younger brother Ryan's voice cut through the packed room like a blade, his words carrying across the polished hardwood of the country club banquet hall where friends, relatives, and old neighbors from back in Dayton had gathered for what was supposed to be a quiet reading of the will. And I swear the way their laughter rose, some awkward, some genuine, seared into me, worse than any fist could have, because humiliation doesn't need to bruise to bleed. It just sits heavy in your chest, making every breath taste like rust and betrayal. And as I stood there clutching the edge of my chair, I could feel the sweat trickling down the back of my neck, mixing with the salt of disbelief, because Ryan didn't stop. He wanted the audience. He wanted me gutted alive under the weight of his smirk. Before we get deeper into the story, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I'm Michael Carter, 41 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, though work pulled me later to Chicago, New York, and eventually down to Atlanta, where I carved out a career that paid in numbers I never thought a kid from a two-bedroom house on Route 4 would see. And maybe that's why this cuts so deep, because all those years of wiring money home, covering Dad's medical bills, even keeping Ryan's lights on when his third failed startup bled him dry, I did it without keeping score. Or so I told myself, but the truth is, I thought loyalty earned loyalty, that love carried weight, that family meant you weren't left standing exposed like this. And yet here I was, surrounded by neighbors who remembered me shoveling their driveways as a teenager, by aunts who once called me the responsible one, watching them avert their eyes as Ryan waved the stack of documents high like some trophy, grinning at the signatures that proved Dad had signed over the house, the land, and every last cent of inheritance to him alone. And here's the thing. While he flaunted his victory, while the whispers spread like wildfire across the room, I thought of the one small detail nobody in that hall knew, the quiet safeguard I had tucked away years ago. And though I didn't show it, though my face stayed still as stone, I knew that card would matter when the dust finally settled. The thing about Ryan is he'd been rehearsing this performance his whole life, and if I'm being honest, maybe Dad helped write his script. Ryan was the golden boy, the smooth talker, the kid who always seemed to shine in the right light, no matter how much wreckage followed behind him. He could crash Mom's car into a telephone pole and somehow come out the victim. He could charm teachers into rewriting grades, girlfriends into forgiving betrayals, bosses into second chances. While I, the steady one, the one who showed up to shifts at the steel mill after high school, who held down 2 jobs through college, was just background, the scaffolding that let him play at being brilliant. I tried not to resent it, I really did, because resentment eats at you worse than hunger, and I convinced myself it was enough to succeed on my own terms, to build a life beyond the small Ohio towns where our parents' voices still echoed. But when Dad got sick 3 winters ago, it was me who booked flights back and forth, me who wired cash when Medicare wouldn't cover another experimental round of chemo, me who sat beside him on those nights when the snow pressed against the window and his cough rattled like old machinery. And Ryan, well, he blew in once in a while, loud and full of promises, before vanishing again with some excuse about urgent deals. So to see Dad's will unveiled like this, to watch Ryan collect the applause, the property, the legacy as if he'd earned it, I could feel something twisting inside me, something between grief and rage, because the inheritance wasn't about money. Not really, it was about the years I thought meant something, the sacrifices that now looked like jokes played at my expense. Still, even as my brother smirked in that hall, there was another thread running under all this. Something Ryan didn't know, and Dad had long forgotten. An old key that hung on a simple leather cord in my top drawer back in Atlanta. A key Dad gave me at 20 when I swore I wouldn't need his help anymore. For someday, he'd said, cryptic, with that rare softness in his voice, and though I'd tucked it away and nearly forgotten, it stayed with me like a relic, a symbol I couldn't let go of even when life pushed me miles away. That key was to a place Ryan had never been, a place whose significance nobody here suspected, and while I didn't yet know how, I felt in my gut it would matter again. For now, though, I just let the laughter wash over me, let the humiliation sink into my skin, and lowered myself back into the chair, silent while Ryan basked, because I've learned over the years that silence can be louder than any shout if you know how to wield it, and in that silence I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't forget this day, I wouldn't forgive this insult, and I wouldn't rest until I had carved justice out of this betrayal with my own hands. And as the lawyer closed the folder, as the relatives dispersed whispering about how cruel fate had been to me and how charming Ryan had turned out, I stared at the framed photo of Dad on the mantel, him at 28, sleeves rolled, grease on his forearms, grinning beside the old Dodge he built with his own hands, and I thought of the words he used to tell me when I was a boy. The ones who play fair don't always win, Michael, but they sleep better. That phrase echoed like a cruel joke now, because sleep was the last thing I'd have tonight. Instead, I walked out into the biting Ohio winter, the wind slicing at my cheeks, Ryan's laughter still carrying faintly behind me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about peace, or fairness, or even family. I was thinking about revenge and how the old key waiting in my drawer was about to open more than just a door. The weeks after that day blurred together in a haze of phone calls, legal letters, and hushed gossip that seemed to follow me everywhere, from the corner diner on Main Street, where I'd grab coffee each morning, to the gym, where old classmates avoided eye contact, all of them already convinced by Ryan's polished story that I had somehow squandered my relationship with Dad and didn't deserve a dime of the estate. And though I kept my face neutral, letting them think I was beaten, every time I drove down the frostbitten back roads toward Dad's empty house, I felt a strange electricity building inside me, like I was carrying a storm no one else could see. Ryan had wasted no time moving in, hanging a giant new sign over the barn that read Carter Innovations in slick silver letters, pretending his startup wasn't just another shell game waiting to collapse. And what sickened me wasn't just the arrogance, but the way he'd convinced the community to back him, hosting barbecues in the backyard with a drink in his hand, talking about how he'd finally come home to honor Dad's legacy. I'd stand at a distance sometimes, headlights off, watching neighbors I grew up with laugh on the porch while my brother clinked glasses with them like a king. And here's the bitter truth. They wanted to believe him. People love a winner, even if the win was stolen, and Ryan had a knack for making theft look like destiny. But while they celebrated, I sat in the quiet of my car, running my fingers over that old leather cord with the key, and I reminded myself that appearances were a mask. Masks slip, and when they do, you'd better be the one holding the camera. Ryan tightened his grip in small ways that cut deeper than open blows. He changed the locks on Dad's house, pretending it was about security, though everyone knew it was about shutting me out. He stood up in church one Sunday and thanked the congregation for their prayers through our father's long struggle, leaving out that I was the one who sat by Dad's side through those endless nights. He even sent me a check for $500 in the mail, no note attached, just his signature at the bottom as if I were some pitiful beggar he could throw scraps to. I held that check in my hands for a long while, staring at the ink until my jaw ached from clenching, and I thought of calling him, screaming down the line, but instead I tucked it into the same drawer where the key waited, because paper burns easy, and I wanted his arrogance intact when the fire finally caught. On the surface, I played the part of the forgotten son, keeping my head down, letting rumors swirl, even nodding politely when people muttered condolences about how hard it must be, losing everything. But behind that mask, I began moving pieces, quietly old friends from Atlanta who still owed me favors, colleagues from the investment firm who knew how to trace financial leaks, and even a retired county clerk who remembered more about land deeds than she let on. Every night, when the town thought I was licking my wounds, I was actually mapping Ryan's empire, finding the cracks he thought he'd plastered over, and making sure the right people saw what I wanted them to see. Then came the small win that nearly broke me anyway. An envelope slid under my apartment door one Tuesday morning, no return address, inside a photocopy of a notarized letter dated 2 years back, Dad's handwriting shaky but legible, declaring that Ryan had been the sole supportive son and should inherit everything because Michael had chosen a different path. My stomach dropped when I read those words because even if I knew they were half-lies fed to a dying man in his weakest hours, seeing them in black ink felt like a knife twisting through the last fragments of my faith in Dad. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table staring at that letter, the coffee in my mug going cold, wondering if maybe I had been fooling myself. Maybe I had always been invisible. Maybe no matter how much I gave it was never going to weigh as much as Ryan's charm. And yet, just when despair had its hand around my throat, I noticed something small at the bottom of the page, the witness signature, a local attorney who had died last year, the same man who had once pulled me aside after church and whispered, "Your father's got a stubborn streak, but he isn't blind." It clicked then. This letter wasn't just a testament, it was a tool, and Ryan had planted it knowing it would find its way to me, trying to crush me with the ghost of Dad's words. That realization changed everything. If Ryan was sending psychological grenades, it meant he was afraid. It meant he didn't know what I had, and it meant the game was shifting. I burned the photocopy in the sink, watched the edges curl to ash, and smiled for the first time in weeks, because in trying to humiliate me again, Ryan had shown his hand, and he didn't even realize I was already stacking the deck. The trouble was, every step forward seemed to trigger another setback, as if Ryan could smell momentum and stamp it out before it bloomed. Just 2 days after I torched that letter, I got a call from the bank where I kept my private accounts, the ones separate from my firm, the ones I never told Ryan existed. Someone had tried to access them using my social security number, and though the attempt was blocked, the implication was clear. Ryan was prying into my personal finances, looking for leverage. I hung up the phone and paced the apartment, anger rising like bile, because this wasn't just about the estate anymore. This was war, and Ryan was trying to bleed me dry before I could strike back. Still, as fury pulsed through me, I ran my thumb along the ridges of that old key and reminded myself, timing is everything. The house, the land, the community. They were chess pieces Ryan thought he owned, but the real board stretched further into places he hadn't even considered, and if I played it right, his empire would collapse under its own weight before he even saw my move. The thought steadied me, but as the winter wind rattled against the glass and the phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number, I picked up and heard a voice I hadn't expected in years, one that froze me to the core. "Michael, it's your mother. We need to talk about what Ryan's really after." Hearing my mother's voice after so many years was like opening a door to a house you thought had burned down long ago, and though time had weathered it, the tone was unmistakable, that blend of steel and distance she always carried, the same voice that once told me to be the strong one. When Dad's anger cracked through the walls of our home, and I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, she said, "Ryan isn't just after the estate, Michael. He wants to erase you completely, and he's been planning this longer than you know." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady, but my mind was already racing with images of her at the kitchen table, chain-smoking with one hand, scribbling numbers on envelopes with the other, and though I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade, something in her urgency felt real, like a ghost reaching through the line to remind me the past isn't as buried as we pretend. She told me Ryan had been meeting with certain people, an old rival of mine from Atlanta, a man named Harrington who once tried to undercut my firm on a deal worth millions, a man who hated me with a quiet, simmering fury ever since I exposed his fraud and left him disgraced, and suddenly the surface motive of Ryan's betrayal cracked open to reveal something darker. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about vengeance, about Ryan aligning with men who wanted to see me humiliated, destroyed, cut out of every circle I'd fought to build. My hand trembled as I gripped the phone because now the betrayal had two faces: my brother's envy and my rival's revenge, and I knew the noose was tightening faster than I'd imagined. The clock was ticking, though no one else could hear it but me, each day another thread pulling tighter around my throat, because Ryan was accelerating his takeover with a precision I hadn't thought him capable of. He filed papers to rename the land deeds under his company's name, launched a flashy press release in the Dayton Daily News about revitalizing Carter property into the Midwest's premier innovation hub, and even held a ribbon-cutting ceremony where he posed with local officials, shaking hands while Dad's old Dodge, the one from that faded photograph, sat rusting behind the barn like a forgotten relic. I stood in the crowd that day, anonymous under my coat collar, and I swear the metallic taste of rage coated my tongue as he delivered a speech that twisted history into a weapon, painting himself as the dutiful son who had stayed rooted while I abandoned family for corporate greed. The crowd clapped, believing every word, but I just watched his hand tremble slightly when he raised the scissors to the ribbon, a flicker of nerves he tried to bury under a smile, and I filed it away, because cracks always start small. That night, I drove to the edge of town where the river cut black under the moonlight, and I pulled out the key, holding it up against the dashboard glow, remembering the day Dad gave it to me. It wasn't just a keepsake, it belonged to the lockbox in the back of the old auto shop Dad once owned, a place Ryan never cared about because cars were too dirty, too common for him. That shop had been closed for years, condemned on paper, but something told me Dad had left more than rust and dust inside, and if I was right, the very thing Ryan thought erased me might be the thing that buried him instead. But every step closer to the truth seemed to pull another shadow from the past, and the closer I got to opening that shop, the more resistance I felt pressing in. One evening, as I pulled up outside, Headlights off, I spotted a familiar black sedan parked down the block. A man inside pretending to check his phone, but I recognized Harrington's driver instantly. And I realized Ryan wasn't just tightening his grip, he was watching me, tracking me, making sure I never got close to whatever secrets still lay hidden. For a moment, doubt clawed at me. Was I already too late? Had Ryan already cleared out what I hoped to find? But then I remembered the county clerk I'd spoken with, her voice scratchy with age as she told me, "That shop's been in your father's name till his last breath. Never touch the paperwork, never let it go." He wanted someone specific to hold the key. The weight of that truth steadied me, gave me the patience to wait, to circle like a wolf in the dark while Ryan thought the hunt was his alone. I let days pass, let Ryan flaunt his new empire louder and louder, while behind the curtain I laid traps of my own quiet calls to regulators, carefully timed leaks about his company's shaky investors, whispers seated in just the right ears so that when the collapse came, it would feel like the ground disappearing beneath his own feet. And still, I held the key close, waiting for the night when the eyes watching me would blink, when I could finally unlock what had been waiting all these years. That night came sooner than I expected, when a blizzard swept through Dayton, heavy snow blanketing the roads and silencing the usual hum of traffic. The black sedan wasn't on the corner. The streetlights flickered and died. The town slept. I pulled up to the shop, breath fogging in the frigid air, crunching over ice as I slid the key into the old lock, the tumblers catching like bones stiff from age. With a grunt, it gave, and the door groaned open, dust rushing out in a cloud that carried the faint smell of oil and iron, memories of my childhood hanging in the air. Inside, under a tarp in the back, I found not just the Dodge but a steel lockbox bolted to the floor, Dad's handwriting scrawled across the top, "For Michael when he needs the truth." My hands shook as I pried it open, and inside lay folders, ledgers, and photographs that made my heart slam against my ribs. Records of Ryan's debts, his failed companies propped up by falsified loans, even signatures showing Harrington's involvement, and most damning of all, an unsigned addendum to the will, dated just weeks before Dad's death, stating that if Ryan ever attempted to claim the estate without fulfilling certain conditions, the assets would revert to the rightful heir. My throat tightened as I realized what this meant. Ryan hadn't just stolen from me. He'd built his empire on a foundation designed to collapse, and Dad had left the fuse in my hands. But before I could even absorb the victory, before I could plan my strike, the creak of a floorboard froze me cold. A voice echoed through the darkness, low and mocking. "I knew you'd come here, brother." Ryan's silhouette filled the doorway, the storm's light cracking behind him in flashes of white, snow whipping around his frame like a cloak, and his voice carried that same smug drawl he'd used in the banquet hall, only darker now, like he'd finally dropped the mask he wore for neighbors and lawyers, and as he stepped into the shop, boots crunching over the frost-dusted floor. I shut the lid of the lockbox and straightened slowly, heart pounding but face unreadable, because if there was one thing Ryan never understood, it was that silence can be sharper than a blade when wielded at the right moment. "Always the dutiful son, sneaking around in the shadows, hoping Dad left you some scraps," he sneered, eyes darting to the box chained to the floor. "But you'll never beat me, Michael. I've already won. Harrington and I—" He stopped himself, realizing too late he'd said more than he meant, and I felt a bitter satisfaction bloom because his arrogance was always his weakest vein. I said nothing, only reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the key, holding it up so the faint light caught the worn brass, and his face twisted, recognition flickering in his eyes. "That old thing?" He laughed, though it came out tight, forced. "Dad gave you trinkets, he gave me the empire." But I just stepped closer, my voice low, steady, the storm punctuating each word. "This trinket just opened the one door you never thought to check. The one place Dad knew you'd never look because you were too busy polishing your lies." His smirk faltered, but before he could speak again, headlights swept across the shop, the crunch of tires on ice cutting through the blizzard, and the door burst open as two men in heavy coats stepped in, federal agents, badges flashing, one of them holding the very files I'd slipped anonymously into the right hands days ago. Ryan spun toward me, betrayal written across his face. But not the betrayal he expected. It wasn't that I'd gone behind his back. It was that he never realized I'd been orchestrating every step of his downfall, letting him think he was the hunter while he stumbled willingly into the trap. The agents didn't waste time. They cuffed him as he sputtered about conspiracies, about forged papers, about how I'd framed him, but the ledgers, the loans, the signatures told a story louder than his voice ever could. And as they read in his rights, I noticed his eyes flick back to the lockbox still open on the floor, desperation twisting his features, and in that moment, I saw the truth he'd been hiding even from himself. He never wanted the money, not really. He wanted me broken, erased, forgotten, because every success of mine was a mirror reflecting his failures. That was the hidden motive, the rot beneath his envy, and now it was exposed for everyone to see. But here's the double twist he never saw coming. The files in the lockbox weren't just evidence of his fraud, they were proof of Harrington's involvement too. Contracts and side deals that tied them together, like co-conspirators. And when the agents hauled Ryan out into the snow, Harrington's name was already being transmitted over the radio. The two of them bound not just by greed but by downfall, their alliance collapsing in the exact way they'd dreamed of watching me collapse. I stood in the doorway of that shop, the storm biting at my face, and I thought of Dad's words, the ones that used to feel like a cruel joke. The ones who play fair don't always win, Michael, but they sleep better. Only now I understood he hadn't given me the key as a token. He'd given it as a weapon, a test of patience, proof that sleeping better sometimes meant waiting longer to strike, letting the guilty write their own sentences. Weeks later, as news of Ryan's arrest spread and Harrington's empire crumbled in the headlines, I found myself back at the diner on Main Street, the same one where neighbors once whispered about my loss. Only this time they couldn't meet my eyes for a different reason. They murmured apologies, stumbled through excuses about how they'd believed what they saw, but I just nodded, because their shame wasn't mine to carry. I slid into a booth, ordered black coffee, and set the old brass key on the table in front of me. The waitress, the same one who'd known me since high school, glanced at it and asked softly, "Still keeping that around?" I looked at her, then at the key glinting in the neon light, and said, "It kept me alive." Because it wasn't just metal, it was the reminder that symbols hold weight when the world tries to strip you bare, that patience can be sharper than rage, and that justice, when it comes, tastes cleaner when you've let the guilty serve it to themselves. And as I sat there, watching snowflakes melt against the window, I felt a calm settle over me. Not triumph, not gloating, just release. The kind of release that only comes when the ones who tried to bury you end up in the graves they dug for themselves, and you finally realize you were never the forgotten son. You were the one holding the key all along. If you enjoyed this story, please give a thumbs up to the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful true life stories.